Should we start, Evans?
I think now we can start.
Hello everyone, I'm Sazini Ndlovu, SDI Zimbabwe, representing the grassroots. I'm here to share with you the SDI experiences using Zimbabwe context on how we are dealing with the identified barriers on climate change. I've tried to break the experiences into three or four components. The first one, I will talk about the climate change, resilient funds, plus women-led savings to address the climate change shocks. The second one is the Know Your City youth-led documentation and how it is used to raise climate change awareness. The third one is the slum upgrading, how it
Thank you, Mazabin. Thank you, everyone. And my apologies for that technical hitch. Perhaps now we can start. Let me start by welcoming you, everyone, to this session. The session that we have titled Unravelling Drivers and Barriers to Locally Led Climate Adaptation Action, specifically looking in informal settlements. I think it's not debatable that informal settlements, increasingly, they are becoming a challenge. And I think it also, in terms of climate impacts, they are also disproportionately affected. And I think in trying to understand these issues, we have invited three speakers. One is coming from SDI. I think already we might have had a glimpse of a voice and what she's going to talk about. It's coming from, she's representing SDI, and she will be sharing the climate change action from the grassroots using the Zimbabwean context. Then secondly, we're also going to have presentation from Build Change, international organizations that will also work specifically in the marginalized areas. Then lastly, we have a presentation from IIED, which is an international research institute. So these three experts will just guide us to start the conversation. But after that, we expect to actually make a deep dive, ensure that everyone also contributes in how we can also unpack the issues of climate change, specifically as they relate their impacts to the informal settlements. perhaps without further ado, we then ask Sazin if she's on the line to briefly introduce herself and then allow the video to then play. Perhaps if I can give a bit of context why the video, we have a bit of technical challenge. So in trying to be resilient, Sazin had to seek the help from the KYC TV, the youths, in trying to kind of put together a presentation and some pictures. So if the network doesn't allow, we just play the video. Otherwise, thank you and enjoy. Sazin, if you are around, can you just unmute yourself and introduce yourself to the meeting?
Okay. Hello, good people. My name is Sazin Ndopu. I'm from the community, Zimbabwe Homeless People's Federation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sazin. Now I think the video will do the talking for you, isn't it? Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sazin Ndlovu, SDI Zimbabwe, representing the grassroots. I'm here to share with you the SDI experiences using Zimbabwe context on how we are dealing with the identified barriers on climate change. I've tried to break the experiences into three or four components. The first one, I will talk about the climate change, resilient funds, plus women-led savings to address the climate change shocks. The second one is the Know Your City youth-led documentation and how it is used to raise climate change awareness. The third one is the slum upgrading, how it addresses the tenure barriers and the governance barriers. The fourth one is the community climate change initiatives, which addresses the tenure issues and the other barriers. Now, going back to the first one, which is the community savings, which are led by women, the city-level climate change resilient funds. It has always been known that communities have always used savings as the main tool to unlock the doors. Women are good savers and they group well, and they are good in keeping their money safe. During a COVID-19 shock, in its initial stage, people were in a state of confusion, and the communities were able to use their savings for food baskets, for the PPEs. That was before any COVID funding. Using the women's savings to leverage more resources with the help of the technical partner, there was need to include local authorities as well in different cities in the creating of the city level climate resilient funds. These are co-managed funds and the community being the main beneficiary. When homes collapse during the floods and etc., and so are people's livelihoods, the fund is playing a critical role so that livelihoods or businesses do not collapse permanently, but can rise within a very short space of time. That is by accessing soft loans. And so are the remedies done to people's homes. Roofs can be blown and people benefit from this fund so quickly. To date, over 7,000 people have accessed the loans, of which 90% are women. Now moving to the second one, which is slum upgrading. Undermining the capacity of the communities in development has always been a barrier, whilst on the other hand, local authorities always claim they don't have resources, which is another barrier. Hence, there is need to come up with a collective approach to slum upgrading, which is more affordable and more transformative. Bringing water through a bowl and opening untapped roads paves way to a more transformative way to security of tenure. Reticulated water will come whilst people are drinking water. We have very successful projects that transformed well. The Varasekwa project in Harare, which has gained some awards. Iminyela project in Bulawayo. Tanaiwa hostels in Masvingo is heading towards breaking the tenure and governance barriers through WASH. So co-producing is changing works in these cities. And then we now move to the youth-led Know Your City data collection. Youths document to raise climate change awareness and build capacities of communities to challenge current power structures so as to position themselves to participate in climate change governance. And lastly, we move to the community-led climate change initiatives. To build resilient communities can be a challenge when community climate initiatives are shunned. We have such barriers in Harare, in Tafara, Harare, and other informal settlements, whereby even if the land was allocated lawfully, people are not allowed to build approved houses. They also struggle to improve their drainage system because the city uses expensive road construction methods. Issues of tenure and climatic effects on women can be highlighted. So it is very essential for the governments to put the community-led climate change initiatives in the forefront, because those are the very first people that feel the impacts of climate change. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sazin, for sharing your presentation. I think you touched on a number of issues, but more specifically, I think you also challenged in terms of how power can be reconfigured and ensure that the communities also play a more meaningful role in how decisions are made. But you also shared, I guess, on issues to do with co-production and how that co-production is also helping in navigating the barriers that are also inhibiting their full participation in climate action. I think we have more time via discussing to react to the presentations, but for now, allow me to move on to Build Change to share their presentation. Over to you, Annie, or perhaps before Annie jumps in, just to give a glimpse in terms of who Annie is. Annie is from ICAT, and she's currently based in Indonesia, and she heads a development program that also deals with climate change at the grassroots. I guess, Annie, you also have time to briefly introduce yourself, but for now, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ivan. So hi, everyone. Greetings from Jakarta. So I'm Mediatrix Riani, you can call me Annie. So I'm the country program lead for Real Change Indonesia. So we work to prevent people from die and collapse and due to the disaster and any climate-related hazard. So about the presentation, will anyone be sharing my presentation, or should I share my screen?
I can share that.
Okay, thank you. Everyone, so we may...
That's working fine?
Yes,
Okay.
it's working. Thank you. So maybe since the intro is ready, I'll just introduce myself. Maybe let's move to the next slide, please. Okay, thank you. And so everyone should have access to resilient home that can address basic needs, protect families from hazard and climate extremes, and be a place of growth and opportunities. But the reality is that many people lack this fundamental necessity. And additionally, urbanization has increased exponentially over the past century and continues to rise. And in many cases, government have struggled to meet housing demand, or the formal housing market has been inaccessible or unsuitable to newcomers, which lead to an increase in informal constructions. Next slide, please. So how can we achieve more locally led climate and disaster resilient housing at scale? In order to do this effectively, long-term and at scale, we must tackle the barriers that prevent people from living in a safe and resilient home. We could conceptualize the barriers to housing resilience along three areas: people, money, and technology. People drive the demand for resilient housing. Someone has to want housing to be safe and healthy and resilient. Someone has to create demand for resilient housing. And that could come from the homeowners themselves, and policy change and enforcement, as well as political leadership. Money represents the financing. How do we bridge the gap between supply and demand, and how to drive investment and financing mechanism for those who need the most? And technology, it is the supply of the resilient housing. How do we build with resilience in mind? How do we use technology for scaling? The next one, please. So there are several examples of how a combination of locally led climate resilient initiative and national housing policy can achieve a scale-up impact to improve access to quality formal housing. In Colombia, for instance, after we've been working for years with local organizations, then we slowly work with the government of Colombia, and in the end, at the moment, the government has able to run a home strengthening financing program. In Indonesia, we also been asked to evaluate the national housing subsidy program to ensure that the integration of resilience elements are being able to put in place in the national program for a green retrofit and disaster resilient. And in Nepal, for instance, after the 2015 earthquake, so Real Change have large-scale technical assistance that enable in the end allocate government resources to be able to improve and repair the homes of the damaged house. The next one. Thank you. People must have the financial means to strengthen and improve their homes. And this requires wider access to affordable financing options for homeowners, and in particular for low-income families, and the government support in the form of subsidies and incentives. Our recent study shows that retrofitting existing houses, it's more cost efficient. So based on design from across 14 countries, we found that the cost to upgrade housing is about 1/4 of building new housing. So it is also cost-effective way to support urban densification. And in fact, retrofitting an existing house to safely support the national, adding additional story in the future could cost average of 35% of building new house. And we could work closely with governments and financial institutions to both create and implement subsidy and grant programs. So technology, the second point is technology for scaling up. The right engineering and construction technology must be locally available, widely known, and cost competitive. The best design in the world will not save lives unless they are built properly. Local engineers know how to design them. A local producer can produce enough quality building materials. We could train local masons, carpenters, engineers, and homeowners to use good quality building techniques that are culturally accepted and easy to adopt with limited training and education. We could target workers involved in construction before the disaster who are committed to staying for the long term and partner with local agency to train such people. We could also work with local building material suppliers to produce better building materials and meanwhile increase profits. The next one, please. Digital technology can also be leveraged to create huge efficiency to support scaling. It could scale awareness and access to resident home information. So BuildChange, for instance, has developed a various mobile application, for instance, in Nepal following the 2015 earthquake, and in Indonesia following the 2000 earthquake. So that aim to help individual homeowners who want to rebuild their homes to get access to various home design options that are safe based on their individual preferences, based on their financial capacity, and guidelines on how to build it properly. The next one. So lastly, climate-induced disaster and disaster in general have an unequal impact on those who are already vulnerable. So for example, studies have shown that women and children are 14 times more likely than men to die during a disaster. Others who are most at risk include the poor, ethnic and racial minorities, the elderly, and people with disabilities. So across the world, we found women to be incredible stewards of their family's safety and wealth when they gain power through access to the necessary knowledge and financing to lead the design and construction of their homes. And in Indonesia, for instance, 65% of brick makers that BuildChange work with were women. So it is essential to support women to be active agents of resilient buildings who lead change. And so next, so in the end, so whether you work for the local or national government in your country or organization in your country, or are engaged in the financing, risk, or insurance sectors, or if you're a scientist, researcher, or architect, we can all come together to build a resilient future. So let's go beyond build back better. Let's build better now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mediatrix or Annie, for sharing quite significant insights on what BuildChange is doing with regards to local climate action. Thank you again for reminding us that disasters are man-made. Perhaps it could be a natural hazard, but it only takes human action to transform that into a disaster. You also shared quite interesting statistics around how retrofitting can greatly improve resilience of communities. Quickly, we move on to IIED. Anna, Dr. Anna from IIED, will share with us how IIED is also getting involved around local climate actions across the globe. Over to you, Anna.
Thanks, Evans. Is it okay for someone there to share my presentation? Is that okay?
Yeah, we can share it.
Thank you.
Whichever is easier.
Thank you so much. Whilst you're doing that, I just wanted to say thank you to the presenters that have come before me. Hopefully you've now have a flavour of the type of climate action that's underway in two quite different informal settlements or different examples of informal settlements in the Global South. As Evans mentioned, most of the work that we do at IIED is in partnership with grassroots organisations, including Dialogue on Shelter. And we co-produce, we work together with our partners to develop action-orientated research programmes, increasingly on how upgrading or improvements to access to housing and basic services can also promote resilient and low carbon cities. I think part of that process, as has come up in both of the presentations, is an emphasis on building social cohesion and also political recognition through co-production in those instances. And I guess increasingly what we're finding is that we're just trying to translate some of these very local messages for national and global audiences, decision makers and financiers. So I guess I'm just going to try and keep my presentation fairly concise. I'm just going to say I've just got 3 slides after this, and I'm just going to touch on kind of 3 key points that we're sort of trying to promote with our partners as being kind of key ingredients to equitable climate action that works for informal settlements. So I just go to the first slide, please. So although it feels like, if you work in informal settlements or if you live in a community in a city, the impacts of climate change are very apparent, but I still think we still think that there's a need to synthesize, document and communicate what we know about the impacts of climate change for marginalized communities that live in and people that live in informal settlements. So to be really specific about that, we want more social, economic, more documentation around the social, economic, physical and health implications of climate change for women, men, boys and girls. We've increasingly finding that compelling stories are really key to kind of landing some of that impact with different audiences. So thinking like quite creatively about storytelling and how you can bring the impacts of climate change to life, very much as we've seen through the presentations that have just come before me. And thirdly, I think there's an imperative, particularly for organisations like IID, to work with our partners to think about how we can innovatively communicate the impacts of climate change at different scales and for multiple actors. So we just sort of recognise that whilst the implications and the impacts are very well understood locally, sometimes you need a range of different materials and approaches to get those messages through, particularly to actors that might not be necessarily engaging with informal settlements. Next slide. And then secondly, I guess we're very focused on supporting and documenting interventions that aren't specifically focused on adaptation and aren't exclusively focused on adaptation and resilience, but also respond to poverty and contribute to low carbon development pathways through participatory processes. Is it possible to there's some noise coming through. I'm not sure where that comes from. Thanks. So I guess we're doing this we're thinking about this in a number of ways. Firstly, that any efforts to promote resilience has to focus on inclusive upgrading first. So that's meeting the unmet basic service needs, housing that already exist in an informal settlement. This is a precursor to achieving climate justice in cities. We recognise that resilience and low carbon development tends to operate in silos at a global level. We've been guilty of that ourselves. We think that in reality, if you look at the type of climate interventions that are being developed at a local level, they often span they're often trying to respond to unmet basic needs, promote resilience and low carbon development in some instances. So that could be, for example, the inclusion of nature-based solutions in response to kind of heat and flooding. I guess, although we understand that adaptation and resilience comes first for people that are living on the front line of climate change, we think that there needs to be an effort to recognise that we don't need to replicate those carbon intensive trajectories that were pursued in the global north. So despite the fact that people that live in informal settlements have the lowest carbon footprints, if there's any way in which we can promote building materials or approaches to improving service provision that has a relatively light carbon footprint, let's do that. And then finally, participation. So we want to dispel the myth that people that live in low-income settlements don't have any role to play in decisions around climate change. Instead, as well as having a relevant voice and lived experience of it, this is also a means of promoting community cohesion and engagement through participatory planning processes. And then the last slide. So then just moving on to sort of resourcing, and I guess IIT's got a long history of working on the need to promote the decentralisation of development finance to respond to unmet basic needs in informal settlements. But there's extensive and ongoing work that's now at play that's focused on getting adaptation finance to the local level. So some of you might be aware of the locally led adaptation principles. This embodies a shift and a global imperative to see the decentralisation of adaptation finance to the local level. And this could be through saving schemes that were mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, but we could also be talking about city funds or local governments as conduits for climate finance that tends to go to the national level. And then finally, although obviously adaptation finance makes the most sense in terms of what we see in informal settlements, I think it's really important to note that resources for mitigation in urban areas are 50 times those for adaptation. And we think this presents an untapped opportunity, not only to respond to adaptation needs, but also to respond to unmet basic service needs and housing. So again, whilst we recognise that people that live in informal settlements have very low carbon footprints, we do really need to dispel the myth that people that live in low-income communities have no role to play in decisions around decarbonisation investments, because at the moment those investments are made in wealthier parts of the city, and that will only exacerbate poverty and social and economic inequalities that already exist in cities. And I'll call it I'll close it there because I think I've just had my 7 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Anna, for that presentation. I think you touched a lot on the role of research and documentation in terms of how we can also kind of amplify the local voices and ensure that they can also meaningfully contribute. I think on the issues of adaptation and low carbon efforts, I think it's an issue perhaps that we can continue discussing in this conversation. To what extent can we adapt? When do we start to maladapt and so forth? So I'm opening it to George at the moment so that he can quickly give us his thoughts on the 3 presentations before we open it for Q&A, where everyone also has an opportunity to contribute. So George, over to you.
Thank you, Evans. Hi, everyone. As you have heard, my name is George Masimba. I work with Dialogue on Shelter, which is part of the SDI network. Thank you so much to our great speakers. In terms of the common issues that have came up from our presenters, I think what I picked is that running through the 3 presentations is the issue of savings or resources, in this case, finance. For example, Sazin talked about women-led savings in terms of their role in pushing issues of climate resilience funds that they, as the SDI network, have implemented with local government institutions, cities such as Harare and Bulawayo. And Annie also, I think, spoke about the issue of money as a finance, as a critical resource that can help to catalyze or scale interventions that are aimed at building resilience. And I think the second issue that also came out from the presentation relates to the significance of documentation in terms of understanding climate change impacts, and also more importantly, understanding the sort of local actions that are being implemented by communities in informal settlements to address impacts of climate change. So finance documentation has come out very prominently in the presentations from our speakers. And then one other item that also came, which is very important, the issue of deploying technology in terms of the documentation processes, but also in terms of considering technology as an enabler in terms of the infrastructure, the kind of housing that we build so that it's resilient to disasters or shocks that are linked to climate change. Perhaps before I add my inputs, Chair, I thought it would also be important to just mention from our experience as SDI, what we have noted as key barriers that limit locally led actions that are linked to addressing climate change impacts. So firstly, we have noted the issues of finance, which our speakers have addressed. Then secondly, issues of policy, enabling policy helps to address or enable communities to respond to climate change impacts, because most of these initiatives that communities would want to undertake are not within the mainstream urban legislation. So they are provide limitations in terms of communities being able to undertake those actions. Then thirdly, issues of capacity, in fact, lack thereof, has also emerged to be one of the key barriers in informal settlements in terms of having that requisite knowledge, resources for communities to be able to respond to climate change impacts. And also even for local government institutions to be able to respond to climate change impacts. And then lastly, the issue that was dealt with, the issue of data, which is addressed by documentation that Sazin spoke about in terms of the citywide profiling enumerations that are conducted by communities in informal settlements, so as to generate the much needed data that informs climate resilience, that informs climate actions in informal settlements. And in terms of 3 points that I thought I could add that could help in terms of catalyzing or scaling climate actions in informal settlements, in particular adaptation actions, I thought enabling urban legislation allows replication and scaling. Why do I say so? I think because enabling legislation then permits communities to be able to experiment with different sorts of infrastructure options, housing materials, building materials, which Anna spoke about. And so that's very key. Then secondly, what is also important is to link global climate finance with grassroots experiences that have been accumulated through what Sazin talked about in terms of city-level funds. So while there's been so much success registered at the local government level through these financing experiments, there is need to connect and link these experiences with global finance that is supporting climate actions in the global south, for example. Then thirdly, there's also need for readiness to invest in building and strengthening local structures. And by local, I'm referring to your community-based organizations, local government institutions, civil society organizations working at the grassroots scale. So if we want to scale climate actions that are locally led, we should therefore respond to the capacity needs at that level. And this speaks to building capacity of these organizations that I alluded to. And lastly, what is also critical, I think it's collaboration, especially between grassroots movements and the state, in particular local government. Communities on their own, whilst they are doing a lot in terms of responding to climate change impacts, there is always need for the state to be at the center stage, to support, complement the efforts, partner with communities so that they can complement, and also more important linked to that, be then able to institutionalize the experiences that are accumulated at that level. I will pause here, Chair. Thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, George, for summarizing and reacting to the presentations. I think you posed quite a number of questions. which I think as we enter our Q&A, should take that on board. So now what is happening, ladies and gentlemen, we are opening our session for questions to our presenters, or not directed to the presenters, but I think this is we are a group of climate change actors. So we have participants from the academia, our local authorities, our civic society, our community, our government. So I think there should be one within the group who should be able to react, assuming the presenters cannot respond to those persons. So now we are opening. You can just raise up your hand and we give you the floor to contribute. Yes, Derek. Hello, Derek, you can unmute your mic and go ahead with your question and contribution. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And I think it has been so far so good. And I really appreciate you, Evans, for the. I'm called Sebaka Derek, Habitat Defenders Africa. Awesome. Oh, it's a good topic that we are driving forward, and to see that the aspect of climate action and the disaster response in the informal sector is really addressed at different platforms. I have heard that the IIED, to say if I captured it properly, they were saying that they are trying to see that they are translating. They're translating the information, especially in the climate awareness, to see that the climate action at the informal settlement is really addressed. So I wanted some clarifications on how they are tackling this. How are they translating this information? Because in Africa today we have varsity of languages across board, especially in the informal sector. If I to look at the aspect of Uganda, you may find that you are in an informal settlement, but there is over like 20 languages spoken across the board. So this initiative is really very, very important to see that these informations are translated. But also talking of climate action, the aspects that I think are being left out in justification, like the aspects of climate justice, the aspects of climate equality. When we are going to apprehend the aspect of climate action, I think these things should come out clearly, especially in addressing the disaster response. You would want to also justify to us how the aspect of loss and damage will be apprehended. How will they be put on table, since most of the representatives that these are exacerbating each and every day. But I think many issues have not been shared, and I wanted more information to be put on table. That is my view. Back to you, Evans.
Thank you, Derek. I think you have a question directed to ID, the scope to expand on the explanation. Otherwise, thank you very much for explaining and expanding the issues. Hello, Anna. It looks like no one is a question at the moment. So Anna, if you are ready, you can respond to the reaction from Derek from Habitat Defenders Africa.
Thank you so much for that. Sorry, you just cut out for the last 30 seconds there, so I didn't catch the very end of what you were saying. Would you mind just recap what you just said, Evans?
Okay, thank you, Anna. Derek, if you're around, you have
just that
a
last
second chance to pose your question.
So sorry.
Yeah, I think let me just ask him to repeat his question.
I'm joining from Thailand and my internet connection isn't fantastic. Sorry, Derek.
Okay, so my question was, you have justified that in your presentation that you are having initiatives to offer translations messages that are aligning climate action in the informal settlements. And also I wanted to see, another question was about the disaster response. You know, we are in the aspect where we want to address the thing of the theme of loss and damage. So we are looking at, and today our topic, we are looking at unveiling the drivers and barriers for the scaling of up a locally led climate action and so on. So I wanted to understand how you are doing this. How are you translating? Because in an informal sector, this informal sector normally, for example, if we were to talk of it brings a vastity of languages, especially here in Africa. You find that in an informal sector, you have like 20 languages, yes, or 30 beyond. Some of the communities we are talking of, these communities, you may find this varsity. So how are you approaching this initiative? And also, we understand that you have been working here, in our headquarters here in Uganda, and we wanted to know, is this initiative, has it just started or it's ongoing? Then how we can get part of it? Then also another thing is I wanted to inquire about the loss and damage, because if we have to look at the aspect of the disaster response, this is very big, you know, it's a very big topic. And we need all the panelists today should address this, the aspect of climate justice and the aspect of climate equality. This did come out for me clearly while addressing climate action. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I might refer to some of one of the previous panelists specifically on disaster risk in informal settlements. It's something that we haven't focused sufficiently on yet, and I think it's a priority for us in the future. And I guess it's, at the moment, there's a sort of conflation between efforts. What we tend to see when we're working with partners is that there's lots of immediate responses to disasters and immediate risks, but I think there needs to be a more concerted preparatory effort to think about disaster risk and how that features alongside resilience and efforts to promote low carbon development trajectory. So I absolutely agree with you, and I think it's something that needs to be elevated, and it wasn't sort of central to the work that we're doing, but it's something that we've been working on, less so in urban settlements, but I guess that we will be working on more in the future. But then I think some of the other panelists might have more to say on that than me. And then in terms of communication, I mean, I think, I guess there's lots of reflection there's lots of ongoing reflection on how best to land messaging and ideas around climate change and how they impact on people living in informal settlements. And I think what it needs is a wide range of different methods and messaging for different audiences. So I think it's firstly about identifying who you're talking to, whether or not you're talking to someone at the local level or the national level or a global level. That requires different types of mediums, different languages, lots of planning. I think also sort of testing different approaches to see what lands well and what doesn't land well. I mean, you can see that lots of donors at the moment are still spending quite a lot of money to think about how best to land messaging related to climate change. The Wellcome Trust, for example, has just recently moved into, has made a commitment, I think, to putting something like £14 billion into climate action work over the next 10 years. And a lot of that initial funding is going to be focused on how best to communicate. So I think it's a learning process, but it needs to be collaborative and it can't be driven by organisations that are predominantly focused in the global north. It needs to be co-produced. It needs to reflect local audiences. But there's still a lot to do there. But I might hand over to others on the DRR stuff, because I appreciate that there's more to be said there.
Thank you, Anna, for explaining. Is there anyone amongst our speakers who wants to add on what Anna has just shared? And I think even also from the participants, the floor is open. You can quickly jump in if you think you can contribute to the discussion. Perhaps whilst we wait for others to kind of package their thoughts, there are comments on the chat box from Michael. I think Michael from Act Together Uganda is saying, I love the point of documenting compelling stories that demonstrate the impact of climate change in local action to address them. Yeah, I think documentation and visuals, they help explaining and driving the points. Then also from Kudzai, there is a comment on the chat box. Is saying capacity for scale and integration at state and community levels, initiated from / by either is a key issue, sorry. Global climate finance accessing needs to be made easier where these two, in brackets, state and society, are evidently collaborating. So excuse my reading there, but I think you can visit the chat box and see the comments that I was just trying to read aloud for everyone in this meeting. So I think the floor is open to everyone. If you think you can add your voice on issues that have been discussed, or perhaps you want to slightly deviate on a related issue that we are discussing, I think we also have that leeway for that. Maybe if you can allow me, I don't see anyone raising a hand. Is there any additional? Okay. From Thomas, he's saying it's high time for grassroots coalitions with state and non-state actors. That is also emphasizing the issue of partnership, so that whatever the partnership we are being forged, they are transformative and they have far more reaching effects. Just allow me to just refresh your memory in terms of what has been discussed with the three presenters. I'm not taking the role of a discussant, that has been done already. I think SDI SASIM just covered the experiences that the SDI, the grassroots, are dealing with in terms of addressing barriers to local-led adaptation. And I think she also tried to share some examples on how communities are helping each other in unlocking opportunities or breaking down the barriers to scaling up locally-led adaptation towards a just and climate action and transition. I think Sazin mentioned a lot and tried to give some examples. Then Build Change, they covered a bit of what are the opportunities that are existing for scaling up locally-led climate adaptation action, specifically referring to informal settlements. And then they went on further in trying to highlight what is the role of other actors, where they were also bringing in issues of finance and technology into the conversation, and how that can help addressing the barriers and try to scale up action. Then finally, IID, they give us some important steps that we can potentially undertake to fully explore the locally led climate action in informal settlements. I thought maybe let me refresh that in case perhaps people might be forgetting what has been covered by the presenters. Then I think on the comment section again, there is another comment from George saying infrastructure extension and provision stands out as one of the key enablers for scale in informal settlements. Is there anyone with another contribution? Okay, so what we are planning to do is to just take a 2-minute health break, and then we resume by playing a video that also try to say the same story around how the climate impacts are affecting informal settlement. What are some of the climate actions that are also being initiated from these informal settlements? But before we break, is there anyone with a question or any a contribution? I can see a hand up. Okay, KYC TV Zim, please just unmute your mic and go ahead with your contribution.
It was mentioned about in response to climate change. I mean, what exactly can be done in practice?
Sorry, KYC TV, perhaps you can unmute your mic and go ahead with your contribution. Thank you. Thank you, KYC TV Zim. I think that's a question to everyone. It's an open question that what is it? What are those specific action, the steps, in addition to what has been explained by Anna, that as a collective we can undertake in building the capacity for local communities to have that amplified voice and the capacity to meaningfully contribute towards climate adaptation action in addressing the impacts. Is there anyone with a quick reaction to KYC TV Zim contribution question?
Sorry, could you maybe pop the question in the chat? Just so we can have a look at it again.
So you want me
Or
to
repeat
repeat?
it. Yes, please.
You want me to repeat the question? Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. There are quite a number of comments and questions. I'll start with the latest one from Kudzai again. This has been a very interesting seminar. I have to dash off, okay, to another. Okay, I think she's just acknowledging that she has to run to another engagement. There was a contribution from George that infrastructure extension and /provision stands out as one of the key enablers for scale with informal settlements. So this is a contribution, but I think it depends. It could also be a question. From Thomas, it is also high time for grassroots coalitions with state and non-state actors. It's also another contribution, emphasizing the role of partnerships and coalitions. Then there is another contribution from Kudzai, capacity for scale and integration at state and community levels, initiated by either of the two, is a key issue. Global climate financing accessibility needs to be made easier where these two are evidently collaborating. So that's the contribution from Kudzai. Then from Michael, I think Act Together Uganda, I love the point of documenting compelling stories that demonstrate the impact of climate change and local action to address them. So these are the comments from the chat box. I'm not sure if I missed anything. So yes, over to you, Tim. If you have anything to add, feel free to do that. George is asking, didn't you hear the KYC? Mind to question KYC TV.
The question is, if we want to capacitate local communities to respond to climate change impact,
Hello, George. Did you hear the question now?
Yes, I heard the question, Evans. I think it's whilst it's directed at me, we can also help each other, even colleagues in the meeting, to respond to the question. But I think what is one of the practical steps that can be taken in terms of strengthening community capacities, it could be around the issue around documenting climate change impacts, so that communities are aware of the kind of impacts or how the climate change challenge is affecting their community, so that they can then use that particular information in engagements with the state at the local government level, or even at the central government level, or even with other stakeholders. So when communities are aware of the impacts around climate change in their neighborhoods, that could be one way through which we can build capacity of communities in terms of them being well positioned to address challenges that are related to climate change. So that's one way I think that could be addressed. And also, secondly, I think capacity could also be in terms of even resources. When communities come together, they practice community women-led savings that Sazini talked about. I think that way also you are building capacity of communities to be able to respond to climate change impacts through locally led climate actions. So it's by building information and also building financial resources. I don't know whether other colleagues on this platform can also add in terms of how we can practically build capacities of communities. I will pause here, Evans.
Thank you, George. I think we have explained. Perhaps just to add a little bit in terms of what are some of the issues. I think when we are building the capacity, it might be important to understand why those communities are vulnerable, are voiceless in the first place. What are the dynamics that are producing those conditions, that making them have less power in making decisions?
Evans, you're muted.
Apologies, sorry about that. I don't know now whether I still remember what I've been saying. Apologies about that. I wanted to add to what Georgie has said, but I think I'll rather pause that for a moment, then we allow people to just have a 2-minute break, grab a cup of tea, water, then we quickly resume in the next 2 minutes with the video from the KYC TV, just trying to document the impacts of climate change. Then we proceed with our discussion. How is that? Thank you. Thank you, Mazabin, for informing me that I was on mute. Otherwise, I was going to proceed. Okay, so we are taking a 2-minute break. So we'll reconnect in the next 2 minutes, whilst we get ready to play the video as well. Thank you. Hello, Masabin, are you ready with the video now?
Yes, we are.
Okay, you can share the screen.
The African Cities Research Consortium, ACRC, is a collaborative research program seeking to tackle complex urban challenges in the continent's rapidly changing cities. These challenges are being compounded by climate-related changes.
The video is not showing
Yeah,
events.
can't see the
Can you
video.
please double check? Yeah.
Hi, Masabin.
Pointing
The
to
video is not showing.
Yeah, it's not showing. We're just sharing the audio.
Whilst the global politics is
Just the sound is playing, but the video isn't. Sure.
of climate change,
Masabin, we can only
Someone
hear the
else
video.
shared
There's
it.
no.
It's not us.
Okay.
like
Okay.
sections of the city who are less
What a cool looking sound is this, huh?
The African Cities Research Consortium, ACRC, is a collaborative research program seeking to tackle
So
complex
now we can hear it, but I think there are two clips playing at the same time.
These challenges are being compounded by
Someone
climate
else is playing it somewhere.
There is growing
And it's on
consensus on the
We're looking
prevalence
into
of
it.
climate change across the globe, with the projection pointing to a gloomy future if no appropriate action is taken to reduce the
I can share this from my side events. Just share the link on WhatsApp.
Okay, I think it should be fine now.
It's not showing.
Settlements for the climate change.
Just a second, we're going to play it now.
Okay. Mazabin, I'm suggesting we can share the link. I think participants they can then play it at their free time.
Consortium,
We can proceed with the question and answer.
a collaborative research program seeking to tackle complex urban challenges in the continent's rapidly changing cities. These challenges are being compounded by climate-related changes. There is growing consensus on the prevalence of climate change across the globe, with the projection pointing to a gloomy future if no appropriate action is taken to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. Whilst the global politics is yet to set a clear path for effective climate action, the effects of climate change continue to be felt particularly by those living in marginalized sections of the city who are less prepared to deal with the impacts. Informal settlements are amongst the least prepared.
Saka zvakanyanya kutafekta zvakanyanya plus dzimba dzedu dzinopinda mvura nenguva ino yekunaya iyoyi nenguva yekuchinja kwemamiriro ekunze. Mhepozve kana ikauya marata edu anombowaruka pamusoro pezvidzimba zvedu zvemarata izvi nekuti hazvina kusimba. Ndingangoti climate change yakatiafekta zvakanyanya semunzvimbo medu muno because vamwe vazhinji vacho vairarama nokurima muriwo vachitengesa. Saka miriwo yakasvika payakafa muminda macho mamusisina miriwo.
Climate change is challenging planning laws and legislative frameworks that used to guide urban programming and decision making. It is now forcing cities to imagine innovative actions aimed at reducing vulnerability and increasing informal settlements' climate change resilience. The ACRC research noted several factors as drivers of climate change vulnerability in informal settlements.
Informal settlements' vulnerability to climate change is driven by a number of factors. Firstly, there is the issue of environmentally challenging sites which they occupy, which require significant investments in developing roads and proper drainage. Then the other issue also is the insecure tenure. Because the planning laws do not recognize informal settlements, the tenure is also insecure.
Security of tenure. Hatina chatiri kugona kuti tiite background. chatakangoita kubvira tangonzi nekanzo stand still kusvika takuudzai zvekuita ndo patakamera.
And the other issue as well, which drives vulnerability in informal settlements, is that of evictions and demolitions. Because of the legal aspects, informal settlements are at a constant threat of evictions and demolitions. And this also affects their capacity to engage in any resilient capacity building exercise within the informal settlements.
Because hatina umwe munhu atokwanisa kuudza nokuti kanzo inenge ichiti makagara zvisiri pamutemo ende kugara kwatine takaita kunenge kusiri pamutemo zveshuwa. Tinogara futi takavingwa dzimwe dzenguti tine chingo chichidzirwa nekanzo yachona pamba tinokandirwa zvimatsamba toudzwa kuti 24 hours munge madini munge matakura zvinhu zvenyu mabva pamuri kudini pamuri kugara ipapo.
Due to their vulnerability, informal settlements are being disproportionately affected by climate change. Floods are common in Harare informal settlements and affects housing and vehicular movement.
The other thing is kuma informal settlement kuno kutakavakadzinga dziya dzongogara zveemergency samakebheni saka panoita mafloods ayaya kunoko zhinji yacho mvura ichierera inopinda mudzimba.
Informal settlements are yet to get a green light to construct permanent housing, thereby affecting their resilient capacity to climate-related impacts. The limited access to improved water supply lead to occurrence of communicable diseases. Residents of Boko Haram in Krobra Farm complain of perennial outbreak of diarrhea in their settlement. Livelihoods and food security are also affected due to flooding and
plus nemvura yekunwa papachina mvura nemvura dzatinoteka muzvimatsime takambovhiringika zvakanyanya. Takaita manyoka munzvimbo yedu muno, vana vainzwa midumbu, vanhu vakuru vainzwa midumbu, saka zvakativhiringidza zvakanyanya. Saka pamadevelopment hapana tinobvunzwa kuti tiite.
Interventions have been made to slow down runoff using sand-segs and improve the natural drainage system. However, all these efforts are lacking state support to increase scale and level of investment. The story is different for settlements that have been regularized like Hopley and Tiwarasekwa Extension. Communities are constructing permanent housing, install stormwater drains and using own resources to connect to water and power grid. The ACRC informal settlement domain is proposing an inclusive and comprehensive slum upgrading practice, which is expected to improve their climate resilience capacity.
Thank you for watching. I think there was a lot of mention of other foreign words. Maybe I can give George 30 seconds to explain what is a CRC so that I think people will be able to put that into context. George, in 30 seconds, please, what is a CRC and how is it connected to this conversation? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Evans. I think in brief, the ACRC, which is the African Cities Research Consortium, it's an action research project, 6-year action research project that Harare is part of. And the agenda behind the ACRC project is to understand factors that can unlock or catalyze urban transformation in African cities. And we are working in 13 African cities, and Harare is part of them, as I said earlier. And why we then got to see this video, I think one of the mainstreaming cross-cutting issues that we are looking at under the ACRC research is climate change, insofar as it amplifies vulnerabilities, risks in informal settlements. So tackling informality cannot be sufficiently done without responding to issues of climate change. I think I will pause here, Evans. Thank you.
Thank you, George. We are left with around 6 minutes before the end of our session. I know there are a number of questions that are on the chat box. So please, our speakers, you can also respond directly to the questions that have been raised. And I think, George, you have just done that on the question on the capacity. on capacity issues. Then there was another one from Antoine. Every slum community needs climate actors for its mobilization and organizing. Very true. I think we also have one speaker remaining, who is Zirile from CCOD. CCOD is the Center for Community Initiatives and Development, based in Malawi, also one of the SDI affiliates. Zirile is the director. Zirile is the director for CCOD, and we had asked him that you just provide with us some key insights over what has been covered by the speakers during the Q&A session, and also perhaps also drawing from his own personal reflections. So Zirile, if you are ready, over to you. You can quickly jump in and provide what you think are the key issues that we need to focus from now going on. Thank you, Zirile.
Yes, thank you, Eva. I hope you can hear and see me. Good morning, good afternoon to all the participants. I have to say a big thank you to the presenters for the presentation that have been made. I'll speak to a few issues as Eva has talked about. My name is Videre Luka. I'm from Malawi, and I work with an organization that supports the movement of the poor for the Federation of the Rural and Urban Poor in Malawi, an affiliate of FTI. I think in terms of the local-led adaptation, would say they came with promises and the possibilities, but you have also seen that there are pitfalls that we have to take care of if we are to build a resilience or resilience for the urban poor. Local-led adaptation were definitive because they had put communities at the center of everything. Communities will be involved in defining, prioritizing, designing, monitoring, and also evaluation of their action. That was the spirit or the thinking behind the development of this process. But going through the presentation, one can see that there are a number of challenges that communities are facing, challenges that we have to highlight, and we have to continue working on to ensure that we have built resilience, because climate change is here and is here to stay. What we have to do is make sure that we are in a position to respond, or informal settlements have been supported to be in a position to respond. So there are a number of issues that we are doing at SDI, but chief among the approaches that we use, we have what we call the learning and monitoring framework. This framework will support communities to have an understanding of what development is all about. So learning and monitoring framework will normally allow communities to be involved in designing, to be involved in the implementation, to be involved in monitoring, but also the evaluation of the project. So it puts informal settlement residents at the center of development, and in so doing, then you see positive outcomes in as far as the response to climate change is concerned. Based on the discussion that we have had today, I have 2 or 3 issues that I'll speak to, and it will just highlight what the presenters have spoken about. There's the issue of decentralized climate change financing. In our way supporting communities, we feel this is still a buzzword. Climate change financing has not been decentralized to grassroots, and it's something that we have to work on. There are others that are questioning what we should justify why we need this climate change financing to go to the grassroots. I would say grassroots communities have demonstrated the capacity to use resources optimally, but they are also the first responders. So when disasters strike, they are the first responders, and it just makes sense that they should be supported, capacitated, to be able to respond to disaster. And the resources also build their resilience. There is an issue of loss and damage that was spoken to. It's another buzzword that we have to talk about. But the loss and damage discussion cannot come in where we are still struggling with the climate change financing that is still centralized. So for us to talk about loss and damage, for loss and damage to make sense for people living in informal settlements, I think we will still advocate for the decentralization of climate change. We know that there's a lot of resources are coming in at country level, but they are being controlled at central government level. We have to make sure that there are means and channels that will make sure the funds will reach to grassroots organizations. There's an issue of climate change governance. Climate change governance will ensure inclusion, and we know that to address the structural inequalities faced by the urban poor, the poor people themselves have to be included in the discussion. Right now, what you see is there are weaker or lack of effective community participatory and feedback mechanisms. In the absence of participation of communities, the talk of resilience building at the community level is just a mere talk. So it's important that the issue of policy and implementation, we have policies, decentralization policies, devolution policies that normally calls for inclusion of everyone when we are designing development intervention. But the implementation of it is what is being a problem, and we think it's something that we have to continue advocating. So implementation of policies that George had spoken to. And there's also a mention of building a robust understanding of climate change risks. I think that is key. That is key. And what we're doing at SDI is we support communities to collect data, deep profiles for them to understand how many people are in their community, how many people have been affected by a particular disaster. Risk mapping, just to raise awareness, where people can build, where people cannot build, and what can you do to ensure that you are safe, supporting communities with their own systems. Those are some of the things that we do. But for us to achieve that, we need now collective monitoring. We need to bring in different stakeholders to monitor this. We have to make sure that when that information has been collected, it's packed in formats that are easily accessible to people. And whatever information, whether it's coming from government, whether it's coming from international partners, that's what IID was talking about, to make sure that we have innovative approaches to communication. Information should be packed in accessible format. That means we have to argue for the use of technology. We have to talk about capacity building at the community level for people to understand these things. And then finally, the elephant in the room, the issue of tenure. Tenure security is, I think, the source of the many challenges that people in informal settlements are faced with. And if we are to talk about the resilience building, if we are to talk about the local-led adaptation, we have to link it to tenure security. It's a critical discussion that we have to continue from here, but we have to look at the issues like slum upgrading, because for people to invest, they need to have the security of tenure. For people to build a proper house, for people to invest in water, for people to invest in proper sanitation, they need to have security of tenure. Those are the things that I wanted to share with you, and those are some of the things that I captured during the presentation. Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you, Zilile, for giving us that summary of the key issues that came out of the meeting. I think you covered quite a number, and because of time, I want to emphasize more. Thank you for, I think there were 3, 4 or so issues, but what I think stick on my mind was the issue of tenure in terms of how we can think more about issues of tenure and how it can potentially unlock the resilience capacity of informal settlements. I think there were quite a number of contributions, but I think we have run out of time and we have to close the session. But before we do that, in terms of next steps, please feel free to drop in your contact, your email, so that we share with you the presentations, and then the contributions should actually continue should you be interested. I think as the SDI affiliates, there are a number of conversations that are taking place at a regional level, Southern Africa, East Africa, around how SDI affiliates can share experiences, learn from each other in fighting the climate emergency and building each other's capacity. So there's no cap in terms of getting more members to join the conversations and build a critical mass that we can also challenge the power structures and demand inclusion around when climate conversations are happening. Otherwise, let me thank everyone for participating in this session, and more importantly to ICAT for being the technical people behind the conversations, and the organizers at the 4th Global Conference, Gobeshona Global Conference. And from SDI and Dialogue on Shelter, thank you very much for the meeting. Otherwise, feel free to drop in the contacts, then we continue to get in touch with you. Thank you to our speakers and discussants.
Hello, Evans. Can we ask everyone to turn on their videos for one group photo? Is that okay?
Oh, I have no problem. I'm already on the video. Perhaps, Tim, that's the request, if you so wishes.
If we could request everyone to turn on their cameras so we can capture a photo of the session and the participants.
Oh, and even for those that are sharing the device, you can also come on the screen. Yes, Masabin, I think
that's done.
Yes.
That's done. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank
you too. We are
bye.
happy to see you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.